Professor Rishikesh T. Krishnan. Mr. Rishikesh T. Krishnan is the Professor, Strategy, Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Mr. Krishnan is an alumnus of IIT Kanpur, IIM Ahmedabad and Stanford University. Formerly, he was the Director of Indian Institute of Management, Indore. He was also a visiting scholar at the Center of Advanced Study of India, University of Pennsylvania and ISB Hyderabad. He also held the Jamuna Raghavan Chair in Entrepreneurship at IIM Bangalore from 2007 to 2010. His main areas of interest have always been strategy formation and innovation. Mr. Krishnan was listed amongst the Thinkers 50, India's most influential thinkers in management, and also received Thinkers 50 Innovation Award 2013. He is also the recipient of Devang Mehta Award for Best Teacher in Strategic Management in 2012. He has also served on a number of committees for Government of India and has always been on juries for NASSCOM and CII for Innovation Awards. Not only a management guru, Professor Krishnan is also a remarkable author. He has published over 140 publications, which includes 2 books on innovation, Jugaad to Systematic Innovation, Challenge for India, and co-authored 8 Steps to Innovation, going from Jugaad to Excellence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Rishikesh T. Krishnan at IMA Conclave 2019 to share with us his thoughts on innovation and strategies.
Yeah, very good afternoon to all of you. So it's indeed a pleasure to be back on the podium here at IMA. Last couple of years, as was mentioned, I had the privilege of being the chair of the conclave, and it's certainly a great privilege to be here as a speaker this year. A particular welcome and hi to all our student friends here who really are the biggest force behind this conclave. So hi to all of you. So I'm going to speak about the role of innovation in India 4.0. And given my background as a scholar of innovation, I think that's natural that I should talk about innovation. Essentially, I want to just talk about how should we really be looking at innovation to power the India of our dreams. And clearly a good starting point for that is to ask what are India's biggest challenges today. I think when you just look around, it's clear that there are a few outstanding challenges. One of them is clearly the whole issue of providing jobs and livelihoods. We hear about it every day, it's not something new. Second one is educating the world's youngest large country, and we heard about that as well from some of our earlier speakers. And perhaps one of the biggest challenges we face today is ensuring health and well-being for our population at a reasonable cost. Now, one of the biggest questions facing us today is how are we going to do all of these things? Given the kind of resources we have, given the kind of situation or the environment in which we exist today, is it really possible for us to address all these 3 challenges? And this is where innovation has a particular role to play, because if we just try to adopt the solutions which other people have followed, it's not going to work for us. Just to give you a simple example, today US healthcare accounts for about 20% of US GDP. And India's GDP, as you know, is much smaller than that of the US, yet we have maybe 3 to 4 times the population of the US. So if you want to replicate the US healthcare system here, that's never going to happen. So clearly you have to think differently if you want to solve India's challenges today, given the kind of resource endowments that we have. So this is really the need for innovation. Unless we think differently, we are not going to be able to build the India of our dreams in the years ahead. What is innovation? I think everyone knows what innovation is, but let me be specific about what I mean by innovation. What I mean by innovation is addressing a problem with new ideas, taking those ideas to fruition, and ultimately resulting in a benefit for different stakeholders. And the reason we need to apply new ideas is what I just outlined to you. Unless we apply new ideas, we are not going to be able to solve some of the most burning problems that we face today. And one approach that India has been very good at, and I think this is going to be the key to India in the future, is being able to innovate frugally. What does innovating frugally mean? It doesn't mean only jugaad, it doesn't only mean finding shortcuts, it actually means something more than that. Frugal innovation really means three things. It means first having a frugal mindset, second following a frugal process, and third achieving frugal outcomes. What do I mean by a frugal mindset? There's a very famous business leader, Ingvar Kamprad, who founded a company called IKEA. Unfortunately, Mr. Kamprad died last year, but IKEA is today one of the most iconic brands in the world. Why is it an iconic brand? Because it makes really good furniture available at very reasonable prices. And this was summarized very well in the challenge that Ingvar Kamprad talked about, where he said the challenge is not in building a desk that costs $1,000, but in designing one that is functional and elegant for $50. This is what a frugal mindset is all about. When you see coming up with really elegant, low-cost solutions as a challenge that you want to take up. Now, when you look at the frugal mindset, in some sense in India we already have it. Because for many of us, we grew up in resource-scarce environment, therefore we had to find innovative solutions. But that's changing. If you look at today's youngsters, if you look at all our friends sitting here on the gallery, they are not growing up in that environment of resource scarcity. So how are we going to drive frugal innovation then? We have to drive frugal innovation by a personal belief. I think we heard Swami Gauranga Das speak about the importance of conserving the environment. He has a very strong passion for that. We need to have a personal belief in waste minimization, in better usage of resources, and in smart improvisation if we want to drive frugal innovation. And the good news is that frugal innovation can actually be taught. In fact, universities the world around are now running courses on design for extreme affordability, which inculcates this whole notion of frugal mindset in the way people look at innovation. The second important part of frugal innovation is following a frugal process. One of the reasons multinational R&D has broken down in many parts of the world is because companies were just spending far too much money and taking far too much time to innovate. So obviously that's not going to work anymore. We need to follow principles of lean management, simplicity, using relentless optimization, a whole lot of other methods in order to make frugal innovation work. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about this in a couple of minutes. And what are we hoping to achieve as a result of all of this? What we are hoping to achieve is a frugal product or a frugal outcome. We want significant cost advantage or productivity gain or increase in functionality per unit cost, which hopefully will be disruptive in terms of features, affordability, and ease of use, etc. And one good news, I think, which we are all familiar with, is that India is known as a hub of frugal innovation. So we already have an advantage that our environment recognizes and supports frugal innovation as an activity. So the rest of my talk is going to focus on that second element of how do you make frugal innovation work? How do you make it work as a process? How do you make it work systematically? How do you move away from leaving it as something that happens by chance to something that happens by design? That's really the whole objective of my presentation today. And I was trying to figure out which sector should I focus on? Where should I give you examples from? When I remembered that this year's Conclave awardee was Dr. Hamid, whom you all heard yesterday, and he was talking about the importance of achieving low-cost healthcare. And then I also realized that that's one of the most burning problems we face today. So I thought I will just explain to you how you do frugal innovation in the context of healthcare. And what is the objective? The objective is to give good healthcare without compromising on quality or safety, but at much lower costs than what we are able to achieve today. Why is this important? It's critically important. Many of you might have heard that the government has started a new Ayushman Bharat National Insurance Scheme for Health. But when the government reached out to private hospitals to join the scheme, the participation rate has been very poor. Why are hospitals not willing to participate? Because they think the reimbursement rates from the government are not adequate to cover their costs. So clearly, unless we bring down costs to a reasonable level, we are not going to be able to achieve the goal of universal healthcare. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is tell you what are the core principles of frugal innovation that you can follow to make frugal innovation a systematic process in your organization. And to help you remember this, we have a very simple mnemonic. The simple mnemonic is you need to be responsive. Swamiji spoke about being responsive to the environment. I'm just asking you to remember this simple mnemonic so that you can figure out what are the principles you need to follow. So I'm going to speak about these principles, maybe a minute or two on each in the rest of my presentation. What are the principles we need to follow? First, you need to identify requirements carefully. Second, it helps if you start from scratch. Third important driver of frugal innovation is process redesign. Fourth is open collaboration. Fifth is to take nothing for granted. Question all assumptions. The sixth is simplicity. Seventh is iterative optimization, that is repeatedly trying to do better. The eighth, which is critical today, is virtual intelligence. And the ninth is exploiting economies of scale and scope. How do these 9 work? That's the rest of my presentation. Okay, let's start with requirement identification. Now, identifying requirements carefully is at the heart of frugal innovation. Because if you over-specify, if you over-define what you're trying to do, immediately your costs go up. So what you need to do is identify what are the core functionalities or the core attributes you require that will provide adequate performance without compromising on basic safety. Let's take a simple example. You see this doctor here standing outside a primary health center in the south of India. It's a very strange sight because there's a building behind him, but he's actually standing outside. He's standing outside because there's no power inside the primary health center. And in these difficult circumstances, you can see an animal hanging around in one corner. In these difficult circumstances, he's trying to take care of his patient. And you can also see the patient lying there on the bed, and you can see a small machine which the doctor is trying to use. What the doctor is trying to find out is there something seriously wrong with this patient which necessitates sending her to a bigger hospital? And what is that small instrument he's using? It's a portable ECG machine. You can just see it has only 3 buttons on it, a very small printer, a very rudimentary screen. And this is compared to a much more complex, sophisticated ECG machine like this one, which you might see in a typical hospital. So what did they identify as the core attributes of this? Essentially, it has to do just 3 or 4 things. It needs to be able to show any irregularity in the heart pattern, which is basically what an ECG machine does. It needs to be able to work without regular power supply. You saw that's why they're outside the health center. Obviously, it has to be rugged and dust-proof, because it's going to be used in very challenging kind of situations. And it needs to have built-in intelligence, preferably, so that even if the doctor is not there, somebody else can use it to diagnose whether something is wrong with the patient or not. So if you can get all of these requirements correct, then you're on the first step to having a good frugal innovation. The second important thing to do is to actually, if possible, start from scratch. What do we mean by starting from scratch? We mean start with a clean slate. Start with a clean sheet to design what you're doing. Many multinationals have found that they tried to bring more complex products to India. They tried to remove all the bells and whistles to bring down the cost, but they were never able to bring down the cost below a level. Why is that? Because many costs were embedded in the product, in the original design. So the only way you can do really frugal innovation is if you're willing to start from scratch and build ground up. The third thing you might want to do is to look at how can you redesign the process. People who have heard me before would know I'm very fond of this example. I'm very fond of the work that Aravind Eye Care has done because they have managed to completely transform the way cataract surgeries are done. And how did they do that? Just by looking at the traditional process through which surgeries were done, changing the way it's done, and brought down the cost substantially. In short, instead of a doctor doing 5 or 6 cataract surgeries a day, thanks to their modified process, the doctor could do 25 or 30 surgeries a day. You can just look at the productivity. Productivity has gone up 5 times, cost comes down by a factor of 5. That's a very simple example of how you relook at the process. And how did they change the process? By getting paramedics to do some of the important steps. focusing the doctor's time on the most critical aspects and making sure that the doctor's time, which is a scarce resource, is used in the best possible way. The next important dimension of driving frugal innovation is to collaborate. These days, most companies realize that they can't have all the expertise required within the company itself. And there's another advantage of collaborating. You can actually collaborate with other people who have much lower cost structures than your own. One of the interesting experiments the government is trying today is to promote something called open source drug discovery. As you know, drug development is a very expensive process. So the government is now trying to get different labs, academic institutes, and other organizations to collaborate using their own expertise to come together and develop new drugs. So this is a way of bringing down the cost of drug development. Another important dimension of this is to take nothing for granted. Don't assume anything when you are looking at the innovation you're trying to do. Perhaps the best example is Dr. Devi Shetty. As was mentioned, I returned to IIM Bangalore at the beginning of this month, and Dr. Devi Shetty is now the chairman of our board there. Recently, we had an interaction with him. You can see when you're talking to him, he's all the time trying to see, is there a better way of doing things? Is there a way one can do education, for example, in a much better way to influence and affect much more students at a much lower cost? You can see Dr. Devi Shetty's ambition. His ambition is to do coronary artery bypass surgery for 1/10 the cost, or maybe even 1/20th the cost at which it is done abroad. He's already managed it quite a bit. He's already brought it down to less than $1,500. His aim is to bring it down to less than $1,000. There's nothing he doesn't question. He questions the way the surgeries are done, how the hospital is designed, who makes the drapes, how the anesthetist works. Every operation in the hospital is questioned in order to find new ways of bringing down the cost. And you can see some excellent videos on YouTube, if you like, which shows how this is actually done. Unfortunately, today I don't have the time to show you those videos. Another interesting innovation that he has brought in the process is to train the patient's family in how to take care of the patient after the patient leaves the hospital. He found that post-operative complications are one of the biggest challenges for heart patients. But if the family is well trained and can recognize problems early, they are in a much better position to take care of the patient. So while the patient is wheeled into the cardiac surgery, the family is trained to look at all those indicators there and figure out how to take care of the patient once the patient is back home. Another crucial dimension of frugal innovation is simplicity. You can't have frugal innovation unless you think simple. It doesn't mean only no frills. It just means being able to do things in very simple ways, but also without quite affecting market acceptance. Really good frugal innovation from India, which incorporates this principle of simplicity, is the Jaipur Foot. Many of you would know that this is one of the most comfortable and at the same time very inexpensive feet that has been developed for people who have lost their feet due to any kind of an accident or any kind of a genital defect and so on. And a large number of people across India and across the world have now been fitted with this prosthetic limb, and they are able to lead almost a normal life. It's made with local materials. It can be easily custom fit by a team which doesn't need a whole lot of training. It's one of the most simplest designs you can think of. It costs the equivalent of $35 to $40, whereas a carbon fiber prosthetic foot in the West can cost anywhere from $7,000 to $8,000. That's the advantage of being able to do this kind of frugal innovation. Another important dimension of this is being able to continuously optimize. Iterative optimization is the name of the game. I already gave you this example of Dr. Devi Shetty. He never tires of trying to find new ways of bringing down the cost of cardiac surgery. And by the way, he does all this without for a moment compromising on safety. In fact, Narayana Healthcare has some of the best success rates and some of the lowest infection rates in heart surgery in the world, and this is carefully benchmarked and also shown on their website. In today's world of artificial intelligence, one of the most important new ways of bringing in frugal innovation is through virtual intelligence. Today, you can use AI algorithms, you can use machine learning techniques to make your products and services much more effective. And if you can capture these algorithms at low cost, you can actually make much more powerful products. But let me give you a slightly simpler example. One of India's biggest problems is that we have a shortage of trained doctors. At the same time, we have a whole range of Ayush practitioners. These are people who have been trained in traditional medicine, and many of them, whether you like it or not, they are performing the role of doctors. In fact, in many parts of India, they call themselves doctors even though they are not supposed to. So one of the challenges is, can you upgrade the skills of these Ayush practitioners so that they can provide a higher quality of service? And this is where expert systems come in. A few years ago, I visited this organization called Sughavazhvu Healthcare in Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu. And here what they have done is they have created a very simple expert system on the computer so that the Ayush practitioner can use the expert system to guide her diagnosis of a patient. So basically, as the doctor keeps asking questions, the patient keeps giving answers which she keys in the computer, and the computer prompts her on what to ask next. So she's an Ayush practitioner who is today able to do at least basic primary health care almost as good as a doctor, thanks to this kind of virtual intelligence which is residing in her computer. Another, and perhaps the most important part of frugal innovation, is to exploit economies of scale and scope. Just look back at this ECG machine I showed you earlier. The printer which is used in this machine is actually a printer which is used for printing bus tickets by the Karnataka Road Transport Corporation. It's a printer which was already being made in large numbers for use in the bus stands across Karnataka. This was adopted to be used in this machine. Why did they adopt this printer? Because it was already available in volume. It was already there at a low cost. By adapting this, they could bring down the cost of this particular machine. This is a simple example of economies of scope. Something used in one setting could be used in another setting at low cost in order to drive it further. And you can see similar examples of scale and scope in almost everything we do. To sum up, let me just give you one example of a hospital which uses almost all these techniques very effectively in a very different area, in maternal health. So this is a hospital chain which is in Hyderabad called Lifespring Hospitals, and their aim is to provide core maternal health care at 30 to 50% of the market price. What they do is they have a whole chain of small hospitals which are in a pretty close to each other, but in areas where a lot of low-income people live. And essentially, they have a central diagnostic facility which is like an Amazon warehouse. So if you know the way Amazon works, I was thinking Walmart, more like a Walmart warehouse. If you don't know the way Walmart works, usually they have a distribution center and then they have a lot of stores around the center. So the whole logistics works based on the core distribution center. So Lifespring has a similar concept. They have a core diagnostic center with a lot of small, very functional hospitals around. These are no-frills hospitals. They focus on high throughput so that they have economies of scale. Their whole idea is to focus on specialization and standardization, and they use the cluster model to improve asset utilization and bring down costs. So just to sum up, if you want to do good frugal innovation, you need to follow a frugal process. There are 9 principles which I am suggesting to you. They sum up in this neat mnemonic called responsive. Be careful about identifying requirements, start from scratch, use process redesign, collaborate with others who can bring in low-cost elements, don't take anything for granted or as given. Simplicity is the core. Use iterative optimization to drive down costs, embed virtual intelligence, and particularly try to exploit AI if you can, and use economies of scale and scope to drive down the cost of any product or service. So this is really what frugal innovation is all about, and I hope this will be useful to many of you, and we can all use it to address some of the big problems. Thank you.